what I want to do is basically run through, I think it's 6 steps of what are the basics of how to build your kind of loop rig, and go through the key essentials. And then I think what the most helpful thing we could do is actually demo some of the stuff with the clicks and the cues in the house, so you hear what we have in our ears. 4 essential things you need straight away. You can't do this without a click. I'm going to put a click in the house. Col, if you could put the click on the front of house. This lovely sound is what we call a click. I know many of you have used these before. It sounds very irritating, and it is to start with, but once you've used it for a little while, you feel empty when it's not there, and you get really nervous, like, oh, I don't know what tempo to do anything. We have in-ear monitors. Everyone on stage got in-ear monitors, so we can hear the click. You can't really run tracks and loops without in-ear monitors. They're the 2 basics. Next important essential is your drummer. Some people find playing to a click or locking in with a click really easy. Some people really struggle with it. I think even if you're not going to start using loops on a Sunday or in church at all, it's a really good discipline to get your drummer straight away playing to a click as soon as possible. It will make him a much, much better drummer, whether he's on click or not. But if you haven't got a drummer who can play to a click, it basically cuts out the option of using loops at all on a Sunday. 4th thing on the list, a device to play tracks. I'll talk about tracks in a minute, but there's a few different ways of triggering tracks. I'll talk about a few different options as we go forward. So there are 4 things you need. You can't use loops without those 4 things. Next slide. These sites changed our loop life, particularly loopcommunity.com. As the name suggests, it's a community of worship leaders who are using loops, but creating their own. Well, it started by they're creating their own loops in worship. There's thousands of loops on there. They're fairly cheap to buy, but they kind of specialize in the community-driven stuff. So not stuff off albums, but worship leaders or musicians who are creating tracks at home in GarageBand and Logic. They upload them to Loop Community, so you can get your hands on there. Multitracks is basically what it says in the tin. When Bethel, Hillsong, all the big names, when they release an album, they will pretty much always release the multitracks or the stems, which is basically all the audio files that make up the track. They will make them available to purchase through multitracks.com. One thing to say, if you're going to start venturing down the whole loops thing, it does get very expensive. So right away, it's important, I think, to just bring this to church leaders a little bit and say, look, we're really thinking, we want seriously about this loop stuff, but it needs to be an investment. I think we have spent hundreds and hundreds of pounds putting this rig together and buying loops. Multitracks.com sell them for each track for about $29.99 dollars, so £21 per track. So we're running like 25 tracks just for this weekend. You quickly do the maths, and that's just the tracks. Next slide. Next thing you need is you pick a device to play your tracks on. So you've got your tracks. The simplest way is to grab an iPad or an iPhone you can do it on. And again, these 2 sites have got some great apps. Loop Community has an app called Prime, which is probably the most basic and simplest way of running loops in worship. They link it to their website. You can have an account with them. So you can log in, you can buy tracks from Loop Community and download them straight away to your iPad. It looks a little bit, I don't know if you can see that picture. It kind of breaks up. At the top, you can kind of see all the stems together so you can know your way around the song. Then all your multi-tracks are those kind of blue bars. You can mix them on your iPad. And on the right-hand side is like kind of your library or your set list. I'll talk about triggering tracks in a minute. One of the disadvantages of running tracks on your iPads is that it's quite fiddly. And if you've got fat fingers like me, you can trigger the wrong thing very easily, like Dan does on a regular basis. Next thing is playback, which is Multitrack's version of it. The advantage of playback, and I've only used it very briefly, is that they have like a subscription service available. So you can basically hire, it's like iTunes, you can hire a track for a weekend for a cheaper amount of money. So if you're only going to do What a Beautiful Name once, hire it for the weekend, you don't have to spend £21 on it. The advantage of running it on an iPhone, both of those work on an iPhone as well as an iPad. The advantage of that is it's super cheap. The apps are free. They want you to use them and want to buy their tracks. That's how they make their money. The simplest way, next slide, simplest way of plugging it in would be one of these. a simple mini jack with a stereo quarter-inch jack. Is that what that's called? Yeah. So you take a left and a right out of your mini jack port, wherever it is on that iPad. Run that to the back. So the best way, shove that red and black into two different DI boxes. That goes straight into the back. So obviously you want your click and your cues, which I'll demo in a minute, coming in our ears, and you want the track coming out of house. Just to demo what a cue sounds like. It's all well and good, all locking into a click, but the cue track basically will count you in and tell you when to go to a verse and a chorus. Just find one that we used this morning. So we did You Are Good. We didn't run a track this morning. We literally just had cues and a click in our ears. Is it in the house?
You Are Good.
Intro. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So, and I've also had a little, like a guide at the beginning, which is my voice. I've just recorded those on my iPhone, so I know what track I'm cueing at any one time.
You Are Good.
Intro. 1, 2, 3.
At Your Name. Alive with Worship.
1, 2.
One of the most stressful things about running tracks, well, there's always a bit of doubt in your mind about what you've actually cued. So actually having those little descriptions, the little title right at the beginning, I found has been really, really helpful recently. I'm going to go through this really quick. Next slide. Okay, slightly more advanced way of using loops, which is what we're doing in terms of this rig right here, is a software called Ableton Live. Ableton Live is basically built for this stuff, and it's used all over the world to run loops, not just in worship, but mainly actually in kind of house music and stuff like that. And that's where the term loop would come, because everything would loop. Next slide. Ableton is, I don't know if you can see that, it's slightly more complicated. Actually, it's very much more complicated than running it on an iPad. But if you're serious about it and you want to run, if you're going to venture down this path in the long term, it's definitely worth getting your head around Ableton. If you're a bit of a music techie geek like me and like Dan, you're going to love this. If not, then completely ignore everything I'm going to say. How this works, just a quick overview. The right-hand side, this is exactly basically what I'm seeing on this right now. The right-hand side is your kind of your set list or your bank or your library of songs. And then down the colors, so the yellow, that's basically all the percussion, all the drum stems. Then you've got your bass stems and your synth stems. I'm not sure what blue is. Blue is the piano that we put in for rehearsing. And then you've got the whites, which is the cues and the clicks. So the advantage of doing it that way, and the disadvantage of just the left and right, which is that cable, is that you can shove this into what we call an audio interface, which is this big box. And that basically means we can separate all those tracks and send, it's like multiple DI boxes, send all of those stems to the guys at the back. So Colin has control over every element that we're triggering. So I think unless, we've done it lots of times before, and you listen to loops on headphones in preparation for it, and you think the mix is right, as soon as you launch it on a Sunday, in terms of how someone's EQ'd that particular track, suddenly this tambourine is way out here, or this big synth. So them having control over it is suddenly, and then the band can select exactly what they want as well. They can say, look, I don't want any percussion, it's disturbing me, or I don't want any bass synth because it's ripping my ears apart. So that's a really quick overview of Ableton. Ableton is a wonderful bit of software. It's, I love it. There's so much you can do with it. Just briefly for any geeks, we've got this little network going on, which Josh created for us, which is wonderful. All through Ableton, we're all hooked up. So we have lots of MacBooks on stage. It's massively overkill. Everyone's connected to this master. So when we trigger something,
1, 2, 3, 4.
it will change their patches in the guitar case and for keys. So actually, do you want to just turn your laptop around? Let's see if this is actually working. Oh, it's main stage that you can see it. That's a bit far away. But basically, what stresses people out is knowing where their patches are, or their tap tempos, all the details of your pedal board or your keyboard sound. But when you tell someone they can do a song really quickly, you know that thing, oh, no, I don't know what patch I've got. This will basically sort out their patches for you. So it's a wonderful bit of kit. And it will sort out, I think it's the tap tempos as well, get triggered. So any digital pedal, basically, that accepts MIDI, you can filter it through. Also got this cool thing happening with this Moog, which basically plays itself most of the time, which is wonderful. It means Josh can play bass and have a Moog in front of him. In very, very simple, quick terms, how we've done that is we've basically written the part in through MIDI, that then the laptop tells the Moog what to do, but he still has complete control over the filters. I think with loops as well, what we used to do when we didn't have a keyboard player is we'd trigger a whole load of stems, loads of bass stems, loads of synth stems. I think 2 years ago at Ashburnham, we didn't have a keys player. I think it's more authentic if you're playing as much of it as possible. So where I like to look at loops now is that this is the 10% shimmer on the top rather than the foundation of the track coming through the laptop. It's not always the case. So if there is an excuse to be able to play a live synth, even if we're not really playing it, we've programmed it, it feels more authentic and it feels more fun for us as a band. Quick one on triggering tracks. So you've got your tracks. I know this is going through quite quickly, so sorry. You've got your tracks. You've chosen your device. You can do it on your iPhone or your iPad or Ableton. How you trigger them is then it becomes really important. I think worship leading is largely about timing and being able to move in the moment and respond at the moment and pick the right song at the right time. And so when you're using tracks and loops, there's just this another barrier or there's another time thing. You can't just launch into a song. You need to think about the loop, trigger it, move on, wait for the cues. So having a device that helps you trigger them is really, really important. Simplest way, with Prime, we literally just use your finger and you hit play and you can hit stop. But it can be a bit clumsy. We've done it that way. We often launch or trigger, when we're not using loops and maybe a smaller setting, we'll use an iPad Prime and basically just put a bed underneath it, just like a pad in B that would last about 20 minutes, and we'd normally run that through Prime. And it's fine if you're doing small things with it. But this pedal, which is this one here called Looptimus from Loop Community, again, it's another expensive bit of tech. It's about $299 or pounds, something like that. My one is right here. It's the most simple and I think best MIDI pedal out there for launching loops, and I've explored a few things. When you get into MIDI, it just gets very complicated very quickly, and you can buy all sorts of, like the soft step pedal, which you can twist your foot around. They're like sensitive, so the harder you press, you can trigger different things. For loops, you want to be really simple. I'm on or I'm off. I'm triggered nice and quickly,
3,
or I
4.
haven't. If you've got fat feet, my feet are quite wide, you have to be quite careful what you trigger.
Alive or
You can get them wrong. This is definitely worth purchasing. Next one, mistakes we've made. We've made lots of mistakes with loops, and I think as soon as you start using more and more technology and worship stuff, you're bound to make mistakes, so you just gotta expect it. Laptops freeze. Ableton, I think it's about 8 gig templates. There's a lot of tracks, there's a lot of audio tracks, it's carrying a lot of weight. And they've built it in such a way so if it crashes, it's supposed to keep the click going. So it's got a clock in it. And you can run tracks with Logic, Pro Tools if you really wanted, but it's not built in the same way. So if Pro Tools or Logic crashes, it crashes. If Ableton crashes, it will at least keep the clock all the time so the band can stay in time. Need a quick laptop. Trigger the wrong song by mistake, that's fairly self-explanatory. The guy at the back puts the cues in the house by mistake. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it might. Cole's a genius, he'd never do that. There's nothing more embarrassing when the cue track or the click kind of leaks in, because it kind of gives the game away, especially when it's counting you in and people suddenly think you're cheating a bit. In-ears fail is the next thing. If you're using in-ears, again, another expense, but definitely worth it. The Shores we use, what we bought for the church, are about £80 a set. I think they're the Shure 235s or something like that. 215s. They will be fine, but that's kind of where it starts, I think. Basically, the more expensive, the more drivers they have in them, so you can have a thicker bass sound and stuff like that. But they start at, let's say, 40 to £80, and then they go up quite quickly to the £800 mark or something ridiculous. Other thing that fails is the drummer. If he loses the click, and we'll probably demo this in a second, so we're going to have to force you to come off the click, which has never happened before, so it'll be your first time. Expect those mistakes, and as long as you expect them a little bit and have some fun with it, and don't take ourselves too seriously, it's all going to be okay. That is a snapshot. I think what would be most helpful if we just play along to a track, and we'll put the cues and the click in the house. so you can hear exactly what we would hear by doing any song live. Just pick a song. It's like, what key is it going to be in? This is Amazing Grace in A. So Luke, give us a nice pad. We're a little bit in our worship time, so we've got a Holy Spirit pad. It's nice. It's nice. Oh, that's nice. And we're going to fall in.
1, 2, 3, 4. Intro.
How we're running loops here is we're basically running tracks rather than loops. So we're starting songs, we're running them to their completion, they come to an end, and I've built them or edited them in a way that we know exactly what we're doing. We can fall out of songs, come back into songs. We built them to serve us rather than them control us. I think the biggest kind of backlash or frustration really is that people think they're quite limiting and we're kind of set to a set structure. You can chop them up, basically. Dan, I don't know if you want to talk about anything. Come grab this mic. Dan basically chops them up and then fires them with Looptimus. This is how they run them at New Day. We thought about running this way. I think it's find a way of doing it that serves you. This is Dan.
Hey, I'm Dan. I lead the worship team at King's Church Mid Sussex, and these guys have graciously let me join in, which is fun. So we started using Ableton a couple of years ago. I think we didn't even realise we were ready for it. We just had somebody in the congregation who's a great musician who bought it for us and gave us a laptop, and we were like, oh, great, we've got to learn how to use this now. But I think, like Chris just said, the big thing for us is trying to make Ableton a servant rather than a master, because it's easy to think, crikey, how are you spontaneous when you're using this? So what we do, we chop the songs up into different sections. So it's a little bit more work, but I mean, I'm not clever at all. I'm not a computer guy, but I've managed to teach myself to do this. So literally, as we go down could we get the picture of Ableton up? Is that all right? Thanks. Here we go. So you can see on the right-hand side, we've got, the way Chris does it is to list the songs. We've just split them up into sections. So we would have, for instance, a life of worship, intro, verse, chorus, like that. And then I would set the start time for verse, say at 8 bars or whatever it is, and then it just triggers down. It jumps down automatically into the next section. What that does mean you can do is press a button on your Looptimus. If you want to repeat a verse, you want to repeat a chorus, you want to stop because it's all going badly wrong, whatever you want to do, you can do that. You can just leave the click running. And we found that really helpful. And actually for rehearsals as well, we could just start a click running and then jump in anywhere in the song. So it is a little more work, but that's worked really well for us. The other thing, if I can just give one more bit of advice, is find somebody else that does Ableton at a different church. So Chris and I regularly text each other with disasters. I had a great one the other week as doing a song. So I'd done This Is Amazing Grace. Next song, started it really nice a cappella, intro, it was lovely, and then I pressed go, and I'd forgotten to switch it on to the next song. So it was about 20 BPM out. It was the right key, but it was disastrous. It was really bad. So first thing I did, as soon as I sat down, I texted Chris to commiserate. So that's good. That's what we do, yeah.
I think you just got to expect that it is going to go wrong occasionally and just laugh about it when it happens. I just want to, fine for the first 3 songs. I don't know if you've noticed, in terms of stuff we're doing, it's easy to cue the beginning of a track. Literally just... We're swelling together and we're going... my little trick, which I'll let you in on, is why don't we applaud the Lord together? And we together are applauding the Lord, and that gives us loads of time to think about what we're doing. So one little trick I've learned over the years, and I know we use it a lot, but it is really, really helpful. Once you get to your kind of third or fourth song, it's a bit harder to launch into something like this. So finding slightly more careful ways of dropping into a track, so most of the congregation are completely unaware of what you're doing, can be really important. So I'll just demo it. Use a song called Mountain on the first night. And it basically has this little progression. So I know when to cue the track to stay in my progression.
One, 2, 3, 4. Verse.
So it's just a helpful way of slowly ushering us into the song. You can do it really nicely with just starting with a chorus and knowing when you can trigger your loop to miss. You've got to be prepared and know exactly when you're triggering. There's nothing worse than suddenly being completely out of tempo with the moment that you trigger it. You're kind of a disaster right from the start of the song. Some of our loops have quite a bit in them. Some of them only have very little, so some percussion. Let's just demo You've Won Me. There's just this nice little percussion part at the start. Just track first.
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's the only thing that loop does, and it comes in, I think, twice. But I think a really nice percussion part, which just kind of makes that intro.
1, 2, 3, 4.